Hello everybody, this is X with DankMTG, here with another legacy deck, one that's been very popular recently. One of the best things about this deck, besides it being a winning and fun deck, is it uses no reserve list cards. So the entry for this deck isn't as high as decks that need duels, LEDs, Tabernacles, Grim Monolith, or even Chrome Moxes. In this video, we're covering 8-Cast. 8-Cast is actually a derivative of a classic deck in Magic known as Affinity, which is from the Mirrodin set. Affinity reduces the cost of a spell by the amount of artifacts you control, as you see here with Frogmite, Classic Affinity All-Star. 8-Cast aims to benefit off cheap artifacts for value spells. In this deck, we will not be playing Frogmite. This is just an example. Nowadays, we can do better than it. Don't worry Frogmite, we still love you. Some people may be wondering, why the name 8-Cast? I know I just mentioned a brief history of the deck, so why isn't it called Legacy Affinity? The reason for that is because of the spell Thoughtcast, which is one half of our main and actual affinity spells. Yes, it's not Ancestral Recall, but being able to draw 2 cards for just 1 blue mana is pretty good. Being that a lot of our hand gets exhausted fast since our deck is very low costing, being able to refill our hand off only 1 mana is just what this deck needs. What puts this deck in being viable is its copies 5 through 8 of Thoughtcast, and that's Thought Monitor. When you get to draw 2 cards, get an evasive body, and add to your affinity count for just 1 mana, that's pretty good. I do feel for this deck, this artwork is a little more appropriate, but any version of this card is good. Believe it or not, we do play some cards that are not affinity. Our first creature here is Emry, Lurker of the Loch. Emry doesn't have a keyword ability affinity, but it has a pseudo affinity or honorary affinity. Let's call it great value affinity. We almost never have to pay more than 1 blue to cast this, and it is a value machine. It synergizes with just about every card in the deck. It's almost as good as drawing cards by bringing back any artifact we have to sack to activate an ability. A cheap cost that brings lots of benefits, you can say it really is a great value. We do also have 3 Psi Master Thopterist. This is a value engine as well. We have a lot of cheap artifacts that will generate tokens with evasion. The ability to turn our extra artifacts into card draw is also beneficial when it's needed. Finally, we have our last piece of the synergistic puzzle. It's Kappa Cannoneer. Hard to believe that a Commander Precon rare can spawn not just a legacy deck, but a really competitive one. What makes this card really good isn't just that it can be dropped as soon as turn 2, or that it has a pseudo hexproof, or maybe because it has a natural 4/4 body that only gets bigger because it gets pumped by every artifact that enters battlefield on our side, even tokens. I think it's all of those. Wait, and it's unblockable whenever it's pumped. Once you land a Kappa, you're in a pretty good position. 0 drops rarely have an impact on the overall game. When they do, they get banned or heavily restricted, like Black Lotus, but this deck uses unassuming artifacts to our advantage. We have a set of conflicting brothers, Baubles, in Urzas and Mishras. Believe it or not, we don't care too much for the information these cards give, but it is welcome. What we really want from these is just to summon the battlefield, add to our affinity count, or to be improvised fodder for Kappa. Being able to replace themselves in later games is a great way to stay in the game. Let's not forget they sacrifice themselves, so Emry can bring them back if needed. What I say, great value. We also play some mana accelerants in 4 Lotus Petals. It counts towards affinity and sacks for mana. This may not be Black Lotus, but it's as close as we can get and a lot less of the cost. Very much like Lotus Petal, we have Mox Opal. Both have pros and cons. Instead of saying which is better, it depends on the deck, but this one makes both all-stars, so we can use the legend roll to our advantage, turn opals into Lotus Petals by tapping an opal for mana, then play another one, sacking the tapped one, then tapping the new opal, so the legend roll just turns multiple opals into petals. Once you guess it, we have some more artifacts. Though rarely played for 0, we also play Chalice of the Void. With extra mana, we usually play Chalice on 1, which is painful on decks that rely on 1 mana spells to enable combos, removal, hand sculpting, yeah, pretty much every deck in Legacy. Guess what? This also adds our affinity. Isn't it great? Moving forward, we do also play some singletons for Urza Saga, that we'll get into later. These include Aether Spellbomb. Being able to bounce a creature is pretty good. Sneak and Show, Reanimator, Merit Lage, all get hit by this card. One bonus interaction is also to bounce our own creatures, such as Thought Monitor for extra card draw, or to protect them from a board wipe like Terminus, Toxic Deluge, or even Supreme Verdict. We also got a Retrofitters. This is also a benefit off any additional mana and also turn any Thopter tokens from Sai into constructs. For our last singleton, well, in the main board, is Shadowspear, the usual equipment for Saga. Being able to pump our creatures and add abilities is just what this deck needs to push damage through any annoying blockers. Being blue in Legacy, we do play 4 Force of Wills, because Legacy. Modern players know with the power of Force Negation, well, you can fear this card as well. Being able to counter not just defensively, but on the offense as well. Legacy is defined by its spells, and all those spells are kept in check by Force of Will. We play a set of Seat of the Synod. Yes, the card that was so good, it got banned from Modern. Well, it turns out that happens a lot more now than it did before. The benefit of having an untapped land that is in our color and adds to our affinity count is why we play a set. We do have 2 of the recent cards in Otawara, or as I call it, Ottawa, because why not? Let's play it over some islands. Just like Aether Spellbomb, being able to bounce something is really good. Not to forget, Emry and Sai are legendary, so this could cost as low as 2 mana to activate. And of course, we have 2 islands, every blue player's favorite. You know, there is a saying for blue players that there's only 2 types of islands, good old blue ones and blue old good ones, but not a good bow. Finishing our lands, there is another saying in Magic, and that is you use your life as a resource, and this card does just that. We have a set of Ancient Tomb. This card is powerful. Being able to jump ahead a turn at the cost of life is well worth it. Combine this with our accelerants and we are sprinting while everyone else is walking. Of course, as mentioned earlier, we are playing Urza Saga. Turns out this is a pretty powerful card on its own, and its synergies align with the rest of the deck. Great card. I do want to show these 2 next to each other, because with Tomb and Urza Saga, we can activate Saga as soon as turn 2 just off our lands. Not to mention how much of this deck can be tutored off of Urza Saga, and yes, I did do the math, and it's about a whole third of the deck. It can also tutor a lot of Silver Bullet when we get to the sideboard. As we say, not all hands are blatantly obvious to all players, so let's understand what makes a good hand and a not so good hand. The thing is with this deck, there's actually more good hands than bad. The deck is very mulligan friendly. The first thing we want to look for is mana or mana sources. Even though we are playing a lot of 0 drops, we need to reliably cast our payoff spells. Which brings us to our next point of payoff. Whether it's draw spells like Thoughtcast or Thought Monitor, or a payoff like Emry, Sai, or Kappa, a hand with 0 drops is fun and doesn't need mana, but what's the point if it's not going to do anything? Finally, we want to make sure we have enough support for our affinity, so 0 drops or Seat of Synod is what we want to see to enable our affinity spells and drop a Kappa as soon as possible. Let's take this hand for example. It's pretty good. It has Seat of Synod, it has an Emry to help us dig for cards, we have enough 0 drops, and we have a Force as backup. And here's another sample hand. This is very much like the first one. We do have a Emry we can drop as soon as turn 1, and we have a Kappa for a payoff. This is another keep. This hand right here is also another good hand. We have Ancient Tomb and Seat of Synod, so we have enough lands. We do have some pretty good payoffs and enough draw power. This is a good hand, I'd definitely keep it. And here's some more sample hands. This hand is kind of tricky. We can drop Sai turn 1, but after that, we're depending on our top deck, and we're left without any artifacts. This one I'd go ahead and ship. This next one here is really tempting, however we're on 1 land with no accelerants. Chalice on 0 does sound like fun, but it's going to hurt us in the long run. Let's go ahead and pass or ship this hand. Moving on to our sideboard, we have Pithing Needle, which is great in almost any sideboard in Legacy. So many targets to name, and tutorable off of Urza Saga. You'll see that with a few other cards going forward. That's always going to be an added benefit. We have Grafdigger's Cage to stop any decks that tutor a lot or reanimate cards from the graveyard. Yes, Reanimator is definitely one of them, but it also stops Dredge and also other decks that use Green Sun Zenith. Soul Guide Lantern is also another good piece, once again for Grave Hate, but it also does let us cycle it if we do need to. Its enter a battlefield is usually what we need, as some decks are hurt really hard if you take their one good card from their graveyard. Moving on with our sideboard, we have 2 Force of Negations for combo heavy matchups, or where we just need more counter magic, as we're also playing 2 Metallic Rebuke. This is like a better Spell Pierce, or 1 mana leak most of the time. Playing Hullbreachers give Days Undoing players a taste of their own medicine, and just about any other blue deck, yes, even mirror matches, because it turns out when they can't draw cards, and we can make more artifacts, that works out pretty well. Flusterstorms as a good catch-all, and to hate on more combo decks, yes, especially those storm decks. Let's make them a bit flustered. Rounding out our sideboard, we have Brazen Borrower. Not only do we get bounce any non-land permanent that could cause us any issues, but we can cast it to be a clock in itself. We do have Dismember as a singleton removal for any creatures we may need to remove. We can pay life or use mana off Mox Opal or even Petal if we need to conserve some life. This is for problematic creatures we absolutely need to deal with, such as Kataki. We have a single Ravenous Trap. Dredge and Oopsaw spells, be aware. This can also be something like a Surgical Extractions if you have that instead. 8-Cast is a great deck to play in Legacy for newcomers and experienced players. With this deck having no reserve list cards, it can be easier to make than a lot of other decks in Legacy. I do want to add that if you do create this deck in Legacy, you have most of the pieces make Modern Affinity, which is another video we can make. This deck may seem complicated, but it's rather more synergistic and rewarding if you take advantage of all the small synergies. That's a deck tech. Let me know what you guys think. If you want to see that Modern Affinity list, let us know down below. Any comments, questions, requests, let us know. We'll always like getting back to you guys. Till next time, you know how we do it. Stay dank.